There's a moment that Robert still talks about. He was sitting in his doctor's office, the same doctor he'd seen for 23 years, and he'd just finished describing everything. The stiffness every morning that lasted until noon, the way his hips locked up after sitting in a car for more than 30 minutes, the grinding in his knees when he walked downstairs, the fact that he'd stopped going to his grandson's baseball games because the bleachers were just too painful to sit on and stand up from. He finished. The doctor nodded, typed something into the computer, and then said 6 words that Robert says changed his life, but not in the way you'd expect. Robert, this is just normal aging. He drove home in silence, sat in his driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. His wife Carol was in the kitchen. She asked how it went, and Robert, who had been a Marine, who had built his own house with his own hands, who had never once complained about physical discomfort in 40 years of marriage, Robert looked at her and said, "He told me there's nothing to be done." That was 18 months ago. Last month, Robert, now 68 years old, went on a 5-day fishing trip to Montana, waded into the river, stood on the rocks, cast for hours, walked back to camp every evening on trails that would have been impossible for him 2 years ago. Same man, same body, completely different story. And today, I'm going to tell you exactly what changed. Because if you've ever sat in a doctor's office and heard those words, "This is just aging," you need to learn to live with it. There's not much we can do. I want you to hear Robert's story, because Robert refused to accept that sentence. And what he found instead, it's something that most doctors never even talk about. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand your joints in a way that nobody has probably ever explained to you, and you're going to see why what worked for Robert might work for you too. Let's go back to the beginning. Robert grew up working with his hands. His father was a contractor, and by the time Robert was 14, he was spending summers on job sites, framing walls, pouring concrete, learning what it meant to put in a real day's work. He joined the Marines at 19, served for 6 years, came back with a work ethic that never quit, and a bad habit of ignoring pain. Pain is just weakness leaving the body. He'd heard that phrase 100 times, and somewhere along the way, he started believing it. After the service, he went into construction management, built a career, built a family, built his own home from the ground up on 3 acres in western Pennsylvania. He was the guy who never needed help moving furniture, never called a plumber, never sat still for long. Even into his early 60s, Robert was active in ways that embarrassed men half his age. He hunted every fall, fished every summer, built a deck for his daughter's house when he was 62. He had a garden the size of most people's backyards. But around 64, something started to shift. It wasn't dramatic at first. He noticed his hips felt a little stiff in the morning, figured he'd slept wrong, took some ibuprofen and forgot about it. But it kept coming back. And slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice, it started changing what he could do. The first thing to go was the hunting, not the shooting, the walking. Robert used to be able to cover 5, 6 miles through the Pennsylvania hills without a second thought. But the season he turned 65, he made it about a mile and a half before his hips and knees started screaming at him. He had to turn back, sat in his truck, and didn't tell his son why. Just said he wasn't feeling it that day. The gardening got harder. He started doing it in shorter stretches, taking breaks on a lawn chair between rows. His wife would watch from the window, and he knew she was watching, and he hated that she was watching. Then came the stairs. Their bedroom is on the second floor, always has been. They built the house that way, never thinking it would matter. But by his 66th year, Robert was gripping the railing every single time he went up those stairs. Coming down was worse. He'd turn sideways and lower himself down like he was descending a ladder, one careful step at a time. Carol said they should look at first floor additions. Robert told her that was ridiculous. What he didn't say was that the suggestion terrified him because it meant she could see it too. It wasn't just in his head. He was changing. The moment Robert knew he was in serious trouble was a Tuesday evening in October. His grandson Tyler plays Little League, has been playing since he was 6. Robert had been to almost every game for 3 years, but that October, Tyler's team made the playoffs. Big deal. family celebration. Everyone was going. Robert got to the field, looked at the metal bleachers, did the math in his head about what sitting down and getting back up would cost him, and then walked back to his truck. He sat in the parking lot and listened to the game through the chain link fence. He could hear Tyler's voice, heard the crack of the bat, heard the crowd cheer, and he sat alone in his truck because he couldn't face those bleachers. He drove home before the game ended so Carol wouldn't know he'd left early. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Robert made a decision. He was 66 years old. He was not going to spend the next 20 years watching his family's life through a fence. He booked an appointment with his doctor the next morning. Now, Robert went into that appointment with hope. He'd been managing the pain on his own. Ibuprofen, the occasional heating pad, just pushing through, but he figured his doctor would have answers, tests maybe, a specialist, something actionable. Instead, he got a handout, printed from what looked like a 10-year-old template, stretches for joint stiffness, suggestions to lose some weight. Robert is 5'11 and 195 pounds. Advice to stay active but avoid high-impact activities. And those 6 words, this is just normal aging. Robert asked about glucosamine. His doctor said the evidence was mixed, told him he could try it if he wanted. Didn't sound particularly enthusiastic. Robert asked about injections. The doctor said corticosteroid shots could help with flare-ups but weren't a long-term solution, could even make things worse over time with repeated use. He asked about surgery. His doctor looked at his x-rays and said his cartilage showed wear but wasn't at the point where replacement surgery would be recommended. "We'll keep an eye on it," he said. "Keep an eye on it." While Robert missed his grandson's playoff games, he left with a bottle of glucosamine supplements and no real hope. The glucosamine did nothing. He took it for 5 months, religiously, every morning with breakfast. His hips hurt the same amount on month 5 as they had on month 1. Maybe more. He tried physical therapy. His insurance covered 12 sessions. The therapist was good, young, knowledgeable, genuinely trying to help. The exercises helped a little while he was doing them regularly. But the moment he stopped going, the stiffness crept back within 2 weeks. He bought one of those infrared heating pads, used it every night. Felt nice. Didn't change anything structural. He ordered turmeric supplements after seeing a Facebook ad. Tried that for 3 months. Nothing. He started using a knee brace, then a hip support. Found himself ordering these things at midnight online and feeling embarrassed about it. His wife Carol started researching knee replacement surgery for him, printing out articles, leaving them on his desk. Robert would pick them up, read them, and file them away without saying anything. The idea of major surgery scared him. Not the surgery itself, but what it meant. It meant accepting that he was broken, that something had gone permanently wrong. By the time he turned 67, Robert had spent the better part of a year trying things that didn't work. He was taking ibuprofen almost every day now, which his doctor had warned him about. His stomach wasn't happy. His energy was lower. He'd stopped hunting that season entirely, didn't even bother trying. And there was something else happening that was harder to name. Robert had been the rock in his family his entire life, the one you called when something needed fixing, the one who showed up. And now he was watching himself shrink, saying no more, sitting out more, letting other people carry things he used to carry without thinking. His son-in-law started offering to help with things around the property, and Robert knew he meant well. He knew it was kindness. But every offer of help felt like confirmation of what he feared most. That maybe his doctor was right. Maybe this was just what it meant to be his age. Maybe the version of Robert who waded rivers and built decks and never sat still. Maybe that man was just gone. He almost let himself believe that. Almost. It was Carol who found something first. She'd been doing her own research. She's a retired school teacher. She knows how to find information. And she came to Robert one evening with her laptop. She'd been reading about joint health, and she'd found an article that made her stop and read the whole thing twice. It wasn't about cartilage. That surprised her. Everything she'd read up to that point was about cartilage, about wearing down, bone on bone, all that. But this article talked about something different, a fluid inside the joint, something that keeps the joint lubricated, acts as a shock absorber, feeds the cartilage. She showed it to Robert. He read it again. The article explained that this fluid, you can think of it like the oil in an engine, starts declining with age. Not because of injury, not because of overuse, just because of age. Starting around 30, the body produces less of it, slowly at first. But by the time you're in your 60s, you can lose a significant amount of that fluid. And when the fluid goes thin, when there isn't enough of it, joints start grinding, start stiffening, start hurting. Robert sat back and thought about every supplement he'd tried, every therapy session, everything his doctor had said. Nobody had mentioned this. He started doing his own research after that. Robert is methodical. It's the construction background, the military training. He doesn't make decisions without information. He spent the next 3 weeks reading, found studies, found clinical research, found a presentation online that someone had put together explaining the whole mechanism, what this fluid is, why it matters, why conventional treatments often miss it entirely, and what researchers had found could actually help. He watched that presentation on a Friday night. Carol sat next to him. They both took notes. "This is the first thing that's made sense," Robert told her when it was over. He wasn't excited yet. He'd been disappointed too many times to get excited. But he was interested in a way he hadn't been in a long time. He was cautious, skeptical even, but he figured he had nothing left to lose. Now, before I tell you what happened to Robert, and believe me, I'm going to tell you all of it, I want to take a moment to talk to you directly. If you're watching this right now, there's a reason. Maybe you're sitting with joint stiffness that wasn't there 5 years ago. Maybe you've been told this is just aging, and something in you refuses to fully accept that. Maybe you've tried the glucosamine, tried the therapy, tried the heating pads, and you're frustrated because nothing has really changed. Robert's story is not unique. I hear versions of it constantly. Active, capable, independent people who hit a wall in their 60s or 70s and find themselves slowly surrendering the life they built. And the reason most treatments don't work, the reason Robert's glucosamine did nothing, the reason most supplements fail, is because they're addressing the wrong thing. Here's what Robert learned and what I want you to understand. Your joints aren't just bones and cartilage. Inside each joint, there's a fluid called synovial fluid that does something remarkable. It lubricates the joint so surfaces can move smoothly. It absorbs impact so your cartilage doesn't take the full force of every step. It actually carries nutrients to the cartilage, which has no blood supply of its own. When you're young, this fluid is thick and abundant. It does its job well. But starting around age 30, your body begins producing less of a key component of that fluid. And here's the number that stopped Robert cold when he read it. By the time you're 60, you may have lost roughly 30% of this critical compound compared to when you were young. 30% gone. And your joints are trying to function with what's left. Now think about everything that's typically recommended for joint pain. Glucosamine targets cartilage. Anti-inflammatories address inflammation. Physical therapy strengthens the muscles around the joint. All of these can be helpful. But none of them address the fluid itself. It's like having a car engine with low oil and responding by polishing the hood. You're working on the car, just not on the right part. What Robert found in that presentation, and what research out of multiple institutions has been examining, is a specific natural compound that appears to support the body's ability to maintain this fluid, not a drug, not a surgery. A concentrated, clinically studied ingredient derived from rooster comb that has been shown in published studies to help restore the thickness and volume of this joint fluid. The presentation that Robert found explains all of this in plain language. No jargon, no sales pressure, just the science laid out in a way that actually makes sense. And I want you to watch it. The link is in the description below this video. It's the same presentation Robert watched on that Friday night with Carol. It takes about 20 minutes, and I'm genuinely asking you to watch it. Not because I'm trying to sell you something in this video, but because if you're dealing with what Robert was dealing with, you deserve to have this information. Click that link. Watch the presentation. Understand what's actually happening inside your joints, and then make your own informed decision. The link is right there. Pause this video if you want to go watch it now and come back, or keep watching. because I want to tell you what happened to Robert after he learned all of this, because this is where the story gets good. Robert started the protocol he'd learned about from the presentation. He was 67 years old, going on 68. He'd spent over a year trying things that didn't work. He was not optimistic. He told Carol, "I'll give it 90 days. If nothing changes, I'll accept it." The first month, he noticed almost nothing. A few days that seemed a little easier, but nothing he could point to and say, "That's it. That's the change." He kept at it. 5 weeks in, something small happened. He was getting out of bed on a Thursday morning, and he swung his legs over the side and stood up. And then he stopped, because he'd done it without thinking, without the usual mental preparation, without gripping the nightstand. He just stood up. He stood there for a moment, not sure if he should trust it. He walked to the bathroom, down the stairs, made coffee, and by the time he was sitting at the kitchen table, he realized his hips had barely registered the morning. Not pain-free, but quiet, the way they used to be quiet. He didn't tell Carol. He was afraid to jinx it. 2 weeks later, he told Carol. She cried a little. He pretended not to notice. By month 2, the changes were harder to ignore. He started walking in the mornings, something he'd given up, down the lane that runs along their property. Half a mile at first, then 3/4, then a full mile. He went up and down the stairs normally for the first time in over a year. 2 feet per step. No sideways shuffle, no white-knuckling the railing on the way down. He caught himself doing it without thinking and had to stop and stand there for a second, just taking stock of what had just happened. He got back in his garden, knelt in the dirt to pull weeds, knelt, both knees in the dirt. He stayed out there for an hour and a half one Saturday and came inside muddy and smiling. Carol took a photo. She still has it as her phone wall screen. Month 3, Robert called his son and told him he wanted to try hunting that fall. His son, who had watched his father decline for 2 years, said, "Are you sure?" Robert said, "I'm sure." The hunting season that fall was the best Robert had had in 4 years. He covered more ground than he expected to. His hips held up. His knees weren't perfect. He's honest about that. But they were manageable. They were workable. He didn't have to turn back. He got his deer. He dragged it out of the woods himself. When Tyler's baseball season started up again in the spring, Robert was in the bleachers, 5th row. He sat there for 2.5 hours, stood up and cheered when Tyler got a double in the 3rd inning, sat back down and stood up again, multiple times, without planning his exit strategy, without worrying about whether he'd be able to get up. After the game, Tyler ran over and Robert picked him up, just grabbed his 11-year-old grandson and lifted him off the ground the way grandfathers are supposed to be able to do. Tyler looked startled. Then he laughed. Robert laughed too, and then he turned around so his grandson wouldn't see his face. 6 months after he watched that presentation on a Friday night with Carol, Robert booked the Montana fishing trip. 5 days, wading rivers, walking trails, carrying gear. He sent me a message from the trip. Said the river was cold, and the fish were stubborn, and the views were something out of a movie. He said he'd forgotten what it felt like to just be in his body without fighting it. He said the only regret he had was 2 years. 2 years of sitting in trucks and missing games and saying no. 2 years of believing that doctor's 6 words. This is just normal aging. It wasn't. It was a problem that nobody had addressed properly. And when someone finally pointed Robert toward the actual cause and gave him a way to address it, everything changed. Is Robert pain-free every single day? He'll tell you no. He's 68 years old. He's worked hard his whole life, and there are mornings that are harder than others. But he manages them. He works through them. And the baseline, the everyday experience of living in his body, is something he would have found impossible to believe a year and a half ago. He went back to his doctor 6 months later, told him what he'd done, what had changed. His doctor said, "Well, that's good to hear." Robert says that's about as much vindication as he expected. It was enough. Now I want to talk to you again, directly. Maybe you're Robert. Maybe you're a little of Carol, watching someone you love slowly give up pieces of themselves. Maybe you're earlier in this story than Robert was, noticing the first signs, wondering if this is the beginning of a long decline. I want you to hear this clearly. Joint pain is not a sentence. Normal aging is not an explanation. It's not a diagnosis. It's not a plan. The fluid inside your joints is real. The research on what happens to it as you age is real. And the possibility that you can do something about it, that is absolutely real. Robert found a presentation that explained all of this. It's the same one I've been referencing throughout this video, and the link is in the description right below where you're watching this. It's about 20 minutes. It will explain the joint fluid mechanism in plain language. It will show you what clinical research has found, and it will give you something that Robert didn't have for most of those 2 painful years, a real understanding of what's actually happening and what might actually help. Don't let another season pass. Don't miss another game. Don't let just aging be the last word on what's possible for you. Click the link, watch the presentation, give yourself 20 minutes and the chance that Robert gave himself. It might be the most important thing you do this year. Before I go, I want to hear from you. If Robert's story felt familiar, if you've sat in that doctor's office, if you've heard those words, if you've watched yourself slowly stop doing things you love, leave a comment. Tell me where you are right now, what you've tried, what you're hoping for. I read every single one, and your story matters, not just to me, but to whoever watches this video next week, who needs to know they're not alone in this. Subscribe if you want more stories like Robert's, because I share these because I believe people deserve hope, not vague hope, real hope, the kind Robert found, the kind that got him into a Montana river at 68 years old, standing in the cold water, doing exactly what he'd been told he'd never do again. One last thing. I'm not a doctor. Nothing in this video is medical advice. Robert's story is his experience, and everyone is different. Before you make any changes to your health routine, talk to your physician, get guidance specific to your situation, but also ask good questions, push back a little. Don't accept 6 words as the end of your story. Robert didn't. And the look on Tyler's face when his grandfather picked him up after that game, that's worth asking one more question. The link is in the description. Go watch it.